Okay. Hello, welcome to Grant Writing 101 workshop. My name is Lindy Petty, and I am a Senior Program Coordinator for Washington County Public Health. Grant writing can be a daunting task for organizations, especially for those who have never done it before. Whether you are new to grant writing or a professional grant writer, we are hoping this workshop will help break down the basic concepts of grant writing that can be applied to any grant. We will also highlight information that is important to consider for Washington County grant processes. So let's get started. So an outline for today's workshop is we're going to cover, what is a grant? We're going to look at the different phases of a grant and also talk about the primary elements that you'll most typically find in a grant process. We're going to touch briefly on how to use data to demonstrate need for the work that you do. We're going to touch on scoring and review processes and some important things to consider when you're writing your application. We're going to also cover just some tips and tricks that will be helpful for not only Washington County grants, but for any grant you might be applying to. And then we'll finish up with talking about what to expect if you're awarded funds from Washington County to prepare you for the contracting process. And then we'll have a final slide with some other resources that you can use to help you outside of this workshop. So what is a grant? At its most basic level, a grant is simply funds that are given to an organization or a cause by another entity to carry out a particular project or activity. The most common forms of grants are made from foundations, although they are also made by government agencies at the federal, state, and local level, and even from private businesses. So what distinguishes a grant from a procurement process? A fundamental characteristic that distinguishes a grant from a public contract is that Washington County will have less involvement in the program or activity that the grant authorizes. The county's primary involvement is to monitor compliance with the grant conditions to ensure the grant funds are spent as stipulated by the grant. Some typical Washington County grant characteristics would include using language of support and mutual benefit instead of obligation to the county, not subject to Washington County Procurement Manual or ORS 279, has a program description instead of a statement of work, describes activities instead of tasks and deliverables. Funding may be provided in advance to support future activities. And grantee will likely retain ownership of work product, for example, research data, but may be required to share with the county or others. All right, so now we're going to be looking at the different phases of a grant. And we can think about this in really two different phases, pre-award and post-award. In the pre-award phase, we're really starting with that basic idea or concept. You might have a vision or some project in mind already that you and your organization want to make happen. So what would be important after you have your idea or vision is to research that idea. It's often useful to try to find out whether this idea has been thought of before. Has it been tried anywhere else? Was it successful? Why or why not? What was learned? Depending on the scope of the project, it might also be helpful to get a better understanding of any formal research on your idea. Are you trying something new? Are there best practices or studies that support your project? That research element is important to help you when you're crafting your proposal in a grant. So once you've done some research, you're most likely going to need to identify resources. And by resources, we mean potential funding sources, capacity, internal or external, buy-in from the community or buy-in from your leadership, and of course, developing a work plan and a budget. And once you've done that, you will have found a grant opportunity that you can use all of your research, and you have resources in place to help you submit a grant application. We'll get a little bit more into what those components might look like in the next couple of slides. And so if you're successful in your grant writing and you've gotten an award from an organization, you'll now enter what we consider the post-award phase. And that's really going to start with a contracting process with the organization that has awarded you funds. The contracting process can take some time, and it is dependent on the funder and organization's capacity and experience with contracting. For Washington County, the contracting process can take anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks from award to assigned contract. The next phase, or the next step, is really implementation. So this is what you've been waiting for and is hopefully the most exciting step: implementing your project and using the funds that you were awarded. And once you've implemented your project, it doesn't really stop there. You are going to most likely have some level of reporting that is required by the grant funder. And really, this is asking, are we accomplishing the activities necessary to meet our objectives? And some funders may also require evaluation, so measuring the impact, or did we achieve what we were aiming for? Reporting can be at different intervals and require different types of information. Some funders will require an end-of-project report or presentation. For Washington County, it is typical to see quarterly reporting requirements. So once you've reached the end of your grant timeline and your project is wrapped up, the next step is really thinking about what's next. You may consider sunsetting this project, or if this is a project that you would like to continue, hopefully other resources or grants have been identified to be able to support the continuation of the project. So the next slide here is looking at the primary elements of a typical grant. So the first thing that you'll notice here is the RFP, or request for proposal, NOFO or NOFA, which is Notice of Funding Opportunity or Notice of Funding Award. This is not a part of the application you submit, but it is a critical element because it contains many of the requirements to which you need to pay close attention to. And it provides the formats in which you need to provide that information. Think of the RFP or the NOFO as the rules by which need to be followed when writing the proposal. The first section that you may see in a grant application is going to be an introduction. So this will be a brief statement of your organization and your project, typically written last after you've finished your proposal. The next piece is the abstract or summary, and this is really a snapshot of your proposal, providing your credibility and ability to respond to the problem, identifying the problem or the issue or the community need, identifying project objectives and activities, and the total cost of the project. So this is really thinking of a snapshot of your entire project in a brief summary or abstract. Another section you might see is a need statement or problem statement. And this is important because this is really demonstrating the reason or the need for the proposal, supported by evidence and or data. This is not often included in smaller grants. The next section of goals and objectives you will typically find in all grants. Goals are general statements of what you hope to accomplish. They are broader and more high level. Objectives are the outcomes you must be met in order to accomplish your goal. And we'll get more into writing goals and objectives in the next couple of slides. Evaluation. Evaluation often has two components. One evaluates the program process. So what activities did you actually do? And the other evaluates the program results. What difference did those activities make? Evaluation requirements will vary significantly among different funders. Some smaller grants may not require evaluation at all. For the budget and budget narrative, this is really just an estimate of the costs that are needed to carry out the proposal's activity, and sometimes the funder will ask you to write a narrative or a brief description of your budget. Qualifications will likely be found in Washington County grant scoring. And qualifications really are demonstrating why your organization is qualified to do the work that you have proposed. And then the last piece here of reporting is usually spelled out in the RFP or NOFO. If it is not, you'll want to inquire with the funder about the reporting requirements before applying. Reporting is not a part of the grant application itself. Rather, this would occur after the project has started or has been implemented. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, sustainability is important, and it is not always included in all proposals, but some grants may ask, how will you sustain the project after the grant has ended? So before you actually start writing a grant, it's important that you spend some time with the NOFO or the RFP. You'll likely need to gain necessary approval from your board or from your community to be able to actually apply for the grant. And so it's important that you're able to collect the information that you need to be able to get that approval. So here you can see there's a variety of questions that you might consider asking when you're looking through your NOFO or RFP. What is the project or program exactly that is to be funded? How are funds to be spent? Who is eligible to apply? What are the criteria and how will you meet them? When is the application due? As you can see, there's a lot of different questions that you might consider asking to help you prepare for actually writing. The primary reasons why many, even excellent proposals don't survive in the review process is that they do not address all the items the granting agency requests. Given that there will undoubtedly be significantly more requests for funding than available funds, you simply can't afford to give funders any reason to disqualify your proposal right off the bat. And it's important to note that the key to a successful grant is often not to convince the funder that they should subscribe to your priorities, but to show them how your project aligns with their priorities. So we encourage you to read through RFP and NOFOs carefully to understand the grant requirements. So for goals and objectives, sometimes you'll be asked to write a SMART goal or a SMART objective. You will hear this term a lot. What does this mean? It really means that each of your goals must include the following elements. For a SMART objective, you want your objective to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So for specific, it can't be too general. We really need to get specific about who we're targeting or who we're trying to help. For example, saying we want to help people is a very vague goal, whereas stating assist low-income ninth grade students is more specific. Measurable is really asking, how are we going to measure whether this project was successful or that our goals were reached? So you might get specific with using language like improving blank by blank percent or decreasing blank by blank percent. Achievable. It must be feasible and easy to put into action given the available resources and current economic and political environment. You don't want to set yourself up for failure by having your goals be too big or too lofty, and then you're not able to achieve them in the time frame that you have set out to. Relevant. It needs to be fitting the purpose of the grant, fitting the culture and structure of the community, and addressing the vision of the larger project at hand. And it also needs to be time-bound. So you need to make sure that you have time markers or milestones by which the goal will be achieved, and you may actually include an actual date there. In the next slide, I'll actually provide an example of a SMART goal or objective. And so you can see the different components of the SMART goal. So in this example, the project is reduce youth suicide. A SMART goal might say, by June 30th, 2025, increase the percent of community-based organizations in Washington County that are trained in evidence-based suicide prevention from 50 to 65%. Is it achievable? Yes. Is it relevant? Yes. You can see that the orange is representing that it's time-bound, has a specific date. The blue section is specific in who is getting trained and in what. And then the yellow is indicating that it's measurable. So we're increasing the percent of CBOs that are trained from 50% to 65%. This next slide is looking at some helpful considerations for scoring and review. Ultimately, these are tips to help you maximize the points that you could be getting in your grant application. For Washington County grants, proposals will be scored using a point system against predetermined criteria. Although it may be tempting to include information or materials in your grant proposal that fall outside of those criteria, keep in mind that reviewers will be looking specifically for content that aligns with the scoring criteria. For most grants, specific criteria are used to evaluate and score applications. You should find these in the NOFO or the RFP. It is important that you fully address the elements that are being scored and that you review each area of the scoring criteria carefully to help you address those elements. Consider making a checklist of each element of the scoring criteria so that you can make sure that you've actually hit on every single area of the scoring criteria. If you are repurposing language from another grant, make sure it clearly aligns and addresses the prompt. It's important to familiarize yourself with the review process. You can do this by carefully reviewing the RFP or the NOFO, or if you're not able to find all the information about the review process in the NOFO or RFP, we encourage you to request information about the review process from the funders. This may look like requesting a scoring rubric or a matrix. Something that is important in grant writing is being able to successfully demonstrate your need for your work. So data and research are often used in grant writing to help tell the story about your community and why your project is necessary. Fortunately, there are many publicly available sources of quantitative data in public health and behavioral health spaces. I've listed a few here, including the Oregon Student Health Survey, the Adult Behavioral Risk Survey, Oregon Injury Data, the American Community Survey, and Oregon Health Authority has plenty of other data and statistics that may support telling your story. Other types of data that your organization may have and be useful for grant writing: focus groups, interviews, community reports or assessments, surveys, and even evaluation findings that you may have from other projects that your organization has done. Many public agencies offer data resources and tools, including databases, data dashboards, public reports and assessments, and in some cases, they might actually be able to directly offer technical assistance to your organization. It's always worth reaching out to public agencies to see how they might be able to help support your organization's efforts. In this example, you can see how I used publicly available data to make a case for addressing excessive alcohol use in Oregon. It's generally good practice to cite all of your sources with credible sources such as public or government agencies or academic literature. I'll read the example. Excessive drinking remains the third preventable cause of death in Oregon after tobacco use and obesity. Excessive drinking includes binge drinking, heavy drinking, and drinking by pregnant women or people younger than the age of 21. 1 in 5 people in Oregon drinks excessively. It is well documented that excessive alcohol use is associated with greater risk for injury, violence, alcohol poisoning, risky sexual behaviors, miscarriage and stillbirth, heart disease, liver disease, cancer, alcohol dependence, mental health problems, and a whole host of other health and social problems. This provides direct support for implementing evidence-based strategies such as alcohol pricing to prevent ongoing alcohol-related harms and protect the health and safety of Oregonians. You can see here in the statements that I've underlined that I've directly used data that was publicly available along with other publicly available research to help demonstrate why alcohol pricing and other evidence-based strategies are required or necessary to prevent ongoing excessive alcohol use. So in this slide, I just have a couple other helpful tips and tricks to share with you. And these you can use as you're going through the RFP or when you're thinking about writing a grant. So the first one, it's important that you have a score sheet with you as you write so that you can make sure that you're hitting on all of the different components that are going to be asked of you when you're writing your grant. It's important to pay close attention to the language and definitions used in the NOFO or the RFP. Use the language of the funder, even if you call it something else. Because again, you want to show how your project aligns with the priorities of the grant that you're applying to. Most proposals for one funding source can be used for another, which is helpful so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, but it's important to make sure that you carefully tailor your responses to each grant so that they align with those scoring criteria. Something else you might consider doing is reading other grants and taking notes. You might ask funders to review past successful applications along with the NOFO or RFP to see how that grant application aligned with the scoring criteria. It's important to use clear, specific, concise responses. Assume your funder doesn't know everything about your program, but also keep in mind that they are reading many applications, so you should probably keep it at a high level and use plain language to describe your program. Have at least one other person review and edit your grant proposal. This is especially important if you do not have a professional grant writer in your organization, so that other people can go through the scoring criteria and see if your proposal is aligning with what the funder is asking. Something you may find in some applications are word count limits. It's important that you pay attention to those so that you don't get dinged points for going over. If you are awarded funds from Washington County, there are some important considerations to keep in mind to prepare you for the contracting process. Most of the items listed here will be required in order to do business with Washington County. The first, scope of work. This is essentially a longer description of your proposed work with outlined activities and specific deliverables. It's really taking what you've written in your proposal and getting more outlined and specific for the contract. The W-9. This is a federal government form that Washington County requires for new contract, if your organization is newly contracting with the county, so that they can file information with the IRS per requirement. The unique entity ID for federal funds. This is the official identifier for doing business with the US government, formerly referred to as the DUNS number. This ID will be required if you are receiving federal funds from Washington County or any other agency as a subrecipient or a subcontractor. If your organization does not have this ID, you might consider applying for one so that your organization is able to accept federal funds. The Certification Office for Business Inclusion Diversity, otherwise known as COVID. This is a state-run certification program to level the playing field by providing certified firms a fair opportunity to compete for government contracts regardless of owner ethnicity, gender, disability, or firm size. Washington County has committed to prioritizing working with COVID certified businesses. COVID does not apply to all organizations, including nonprofits or faith-based. To address this gap, Washington County has an alternative process to describe how the chosen organization meets the 5 elements of culturally responsive organizations listed in the Washington County Procurement Rules. This is referred to as a culturally responsive memo. Certificate of Insurance and Additional Insured Endorsement. Insurance requirements do depend on the scope of work being proposed, but in general, insurance certificates or proof of insurance that meet the county's requirements will be needed to contract with Washington County. This includes an additional insured endorsement, which means that the county, its agents, officers, elected officials, and employees must be named as additional insureds with respect to the contractor's services that are being provided under the contract. All liability insurance policies, with the exception of professional and/or workers' compensation policies, must be endorsed to show this additional coverage. There may be other forms required throughout the contracting phase, but your contract administrator will guide you through the process and provide support along the way. Keep in mind that the contracting process can take longer than expected, up to 12 weeks, but no less than 6 weeks. So please try to be patient and know that we are doing everything we can to move everything along. And I'll leave you with this slide. These are other helpful resources that we've curated to help you in your grant writing efforts. You can click on the link when you access the slides directly. Thank you so much for attending our Grant Writing 101 workshop, and we hope that this will be a useful tool for you as you navigate Washington County grants, as well as other grants that you may be exploring. Thank you.